seems like it's been a busy day for you guys. I saw
Oh,
on Instagram
yeah.
and stuff, lots of events and things. I'm hoping to come to some of the lectures tomorrow and later today. There's, I think, one more, right?
Do you have the links? Because if you don't, I can send you the file.
I do. You sent me like a Word doc with the links on there.
I got the links. Okay, yeah. Okay, just one second. Just see if let me see if there's like an interpreter for Beth. There's Rafael. Rafa, are you there? Oh yes, you're there. So just have to put Rafa in the booth because he's going to interpret you from English into Portuguese or vice versa in case we have
very cool.
questions. Yeah, so you'll be interpreted simultaneously. So.
I've never had that experience before, so it should be cool.
That's good. Yeah, Rafa, are you there? Can you hear us?
Hello. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to put you in the booth, okay, and we'll start in a minute. So
Okay.
Beth, you probably know have like around like 45 to 50 minutes, okay? So just take your time, and I'm pretty sure we'll have like tons of questions. I'm just gonna add half of here.
I don't think I'll take up 45 minutes. I think it'll be shorter, but I hope that's okay.
It's fine. No, it's fine. It's fine. Then we'll have a conversation. And
I also just talk really fast. I have to remember to slow down.
You do. I'm a fast talker too, probably because you're chatterboxes. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you see yourself as one, but
I think I am.
yeah. Have fun. Okay. Yes. Oi, hi, Rafa.
Tá me escutando?
Tô te ouvindo.
Beleza?
Então, tá tudo
Beleza.
certinho.
Beleza, então.
Do something differently I've never had someone like interpret simultaneously for me. Do I need to like pause at certain moments or something?
No, like if you cannot, because usually when we have simultaneous interpreters, sometimes the speaker doesn't even know that there's simultaneous interpretation going on.
Okay.
So, sometimes, yeah. Well, we can like speak like normal speed. I guess it's fine. Your English is pretty clear, so there's not going to be any problem, I guess. Do you have any PowerPoint presentation you would like to share? Do you think you'll be sharing PowerPoint presentation?
I do. I actually have it in like a PDF format, but it's a PowerPoint that I like to do that.
Okay.
Can I share? Should I share my screen now?
Sure, absolutely. This way we can test. Okay, so it's.
Can you see it okay?
Yes, we see it fine. Okay, we can stop sharing so that I can introduce you.
Okay.
Just a moment. Oh, sorry, we're getting started. Okay. All right, guys. Welcome everybody. Once again, this is probably the second lecture of this room in the afternoon. So our next speaker is a great friend of mine, Elisabeth Bunch, who is in speech science as well. She traveled the world for probably 4 years teaching English. That was it. And in this talk, she will be talking about her experiences teaching English in different contexts around the world, including US, Italy, Indonesia, and Brazil. Elisabeth Bunch, also known as Teacher Beth here in Brazil, has a mentorship for teachers. You can follow her at Inglês Na Hora if you want to know more about her work. She's also passionate about phonetics, phonology, second language acquisition, and she also offers courses for teachers and intermediate and advanced speakers of English. She recently started her All-Star Squad project, which is like targeted at more like proficient speakers. Yeah, I know quite a lot about you. And she recently defended her master's thesis, and she studied perception of English vowels by Brazilians. Yeah, that's what you did, right? I guess.
Yeah, I'm impressed. You know a lot. Thank you.
I do, don't I? I'm a great fan of yours, besides a friend. So welcome to our event, and the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Hobson, for inviting me to participate in this event. I wish I could be there in person, but I'm excited that I have the chance to be here, at least online. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. As Hobson said, my name is Elizabeth, but I actually go by Beth here in Brazil. I've been living here in Brazil since December 2018, so almost 4 years, coming up on 4 years. And I got the nickname Beth when I moved here, so that's what I've been going by for the last few years. So just a little bit more about me before I get more into the presentation. I am from a city near Seattle, Washington in the United States, actually a city north of Seattle. I have a bachelor's degree in linguistics and Spanish from Western Washington University. This is my college campus where I studied in the winter, of course, it's full of snow. So that's the university I went to there. And then I got my master's degree in English linguistics here in Brazil. As Hobson mentioned, I recently just defended, so I'm so excited to be done now, to have finished that. And that is from the Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina. So these are just some pictures of Seattle, where I'm from. So it's a pretty big city, well known for some big landmarks, things like the Space Needle or Pike's Place Market, but it also is a place that has beautiful nature. I really enjoy hiking, kayaking, all kind of outdoor sports. So it's a really great place for that as well. This is just kind of showing where my city is. So my city is actually Ferndale, which is north of Seattle. It's right near the Canadian border, about 10 or 15 minutes from there. So that's where I'm from. But now I'm living just outside of Florianopolis in Santa Catarina here in Brazil, in a city called Palhoça. This is my husband Leo with me. He is Brazilian, so at home we have a bilingual relationship at home. We speak Portuguese and English. It's basically Portuguese a lot at home, so we mix a lot of languages. We have 2 little dogs, Coffee and Cookie. And as Hobson mentioned in the beginning, we run Inglês Na Hora, so I deal with the actual teaching aspect, working with primarily advanced speakers and other English teachers, and my husband runs the business side of things. So today I want to talk about traveling around the world. Before I moved to Brazil, I definitely had like the backpacker lifestyle. Loved traveling. I still love traveling, but I came to Brazil and I loved it so much here. I thought, oh, I don't ever need to leave again. I love it here. But prior to living in Brazil, I spent time, about 3 years living in Honduras. I lived in Italy for a year. I spent some time living in Australia, Indonesia, and then now Brazil, and I backpacked across a total of 27 countries. So lots of traveling, and during most of my traveling, the way that I funded it was teaching English. And kind of along the way, I discovered that I truly love teaching languages. That became my passion, and it's something that I continued to pursue in a university. So really enjoyed that. And today I want to talk about teaching specifically English in 4 different contexts. I actually was a Spanish teacher as well. I don't teach Spanish anymore, but I taught both Spanish and English in the States. And then I taught English in other places around the world as well. This is just a little map to show you guys where I've traveled. So as I mentioned, I'm from a city north of Seattle. So up here, I don't know if this map is very clear with all my crazy arrows, but it started up here. I moved to Honduras in, I think, 2012, and that was kind of my first experience abroad. And first real contact with another language. I had studied some Spanish in school, but this was more of like an immersive experience. So I actually was working at an orphanage in Honduras and lived there for about 3 years. When I ended my time there, I went directly into a backpacking trip through Central and South America. So I went just kind of straight down from Honduras and then ended in Peru. After that, I went from Peru to Italy, and I was teaching English there, which I'll talk a little bit more about in detail a little bit later on. But stayed in Italy for about a year total, teaching English / working as a nanny. And on the weekends, I had the weekends off, so I took advantage of Europe having so many, great structure for tourism and travel. And so I visited some other countries on the weekends. And then after that, I went to Australia. Worked as an au pair there as well. I wasn't teaching English there, but was working and saving up money to save for a trip in New Zealand, which is where I went next. I did about a 6-week road trip there with some friends in New Zealand. And after that, I started a backpacking trip around Asia. So in Asia, I went to Japan first. I had a friend that was teaching English there, so I met up with her. And then from there, went to South Korea and then head to Southeast Asia. I had plans to continue up through Central Asia after that, but I got a job teaching English in Indonesia and fell in love with the culture there and really loved the experience. And so I ended up staying there for, I think, almost 3 months in Indonesia and taught English at an English school there. And then where did I go after that? I'm looking for my arrows. Oh, and then I went to Egypt. I actually went to a trip. I returned to Italy to visit the host family that I used to stay with there. And kind of on my way back home, I stopped in Egypt as well. So yeah, just some cool backpacking experiences, lots of traveling before I settled down eventually here in Brazil. So today I would like to talk about teaching English, as I mentioned, in a couple of different contexts. So the first one being in Italy, then in Indonesia, in the United States, and in Brazil. And this photo is from Egypt, just a backpacking trip I did there. All right. So in Italy, you guys might have heard of the au pair program, which I signed up for, and I actually had kind of a unique experience. Typically, when you sign up for the au pair program, you go and you're working like as a nanny in exchange for free room and board. You might get some spending money weekly and things. So I did this, but actually the family that I was assigned to, they were specifically looking for like an English tutor. They really wanted their kids, Felipe and Federico. I think they were 4 and 7 when I started there with them. And they really wanted kind of an immersive experience for them to be practicing English, just, you know, in their everyday life. They already were taking English classes kind of more formally at school. And so I came in typically or primarily for a conversation focus and for bringing that kind of everyday experience in there. So it was a lot of learning through play, which was really fun. I love kids and I love working with them. So that was a really fun experience. It was the first time that I had really worked with young children teaching English. So it was a very nice experience. As you can see, they dressed me up. I think I was like a princess here and they were a princess or something here. But it was very nice. I was in a city called Cittadella Veneto, which is near Venice in Italy, or Venezia. And yeah, I was there for about a year. The kids, they were probably between like an A2 and B1 level when I got there. And they did really well. They had a mix of the formal classes at school and then also combined with a lot of conversation at home and things. So I spent during the week almost all my time with them whenever they weren't in school, and then on the weekends I had off, which was fun for traveling. And of course their native language was Italian. So I also taught English in Indonesia. This was kind of a random experience. It wasn't planned. I was just backpacking around Asia, and when I was staying at a hostel, I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do next. I didn't have a lot of plans, and I came into contact with someone who had like a friend of a friend of someone that owned an English school, and he said, "Oh, you're a native English speaker. Why don't you go and see if they'd like to have some conversation partners or something, and you could visit for a few days." So the plan was for me to stay there for just 2 or 3 days and have some conversation practice with the students. But I got there and I fell in love with the culture. It was really unique from anything else that I had ever experienced. So I really, really enjoyed it and ended up staying there for about 3 months. This was a really unique environment, I think. We were staying in a small farming village in East Java. in Indonesia. But this farming village, they had like a lot of English schools. So it was kind of a well-known village where teenagers would come for kind of like a summer camp experience. And so they would come, they had kind of like an English only policy during most of the time there. And so it was a really great environment because like almost everyone in the village was learning English. And so aside from formal classes at school and things, and when they were at the school, even in their free time, they would go out and they were surrounded by other English learners, which was very cool. I was the lead teacher in a vocabulary class at the school I taught, and then I also assisted in grammar and pronunciation classes. Another interesting thing here, which is just a cultural aspect, this island where I was, they were predominantly Muslim, and that was a big part of the culture there. So they had morning prayers. I think it was around 5 or 5:30 a.m. And immediately after that, we would start English class. So I am a morning person, but I don't know if I would ever want to teach English at 5:30 in the morning every day again. That was quite an experience, but it was very cool. So yeah, we had 5:30 a.m. vocabulary class every day for about 3 months. And then the grammar and pronunciation classes were later in the day. As I mentioned, all the students were teens. They ranged. I think we had 3 different levels when I was there. We had, or no, maybe 4, A1, A2, B1 and B2. So they were split into different levels, but they're pretty big groups. And something really interesting here, the students, so they all spoke Indonesian as one of their primary languages, but they also spoke a lot of various regional languages. So some of you may already know, in Indonesia is made up of many different islands, and each island has its own language. And sometimes even within an island, there's different regional languages. So these students, they were multilingual already. A lot of them spoke Arabic as well. So they already had Indonesian, a regional language, and Arabic under their belt, and then they were starting English. So that was a very cool experience, seeing people that to start learning English that were already very multilingual. So that was very cool. It made it tricky though. I was trying to learn Indonesian while I was there, and I would often get words mixed up without knowing it was some of the regional words, because I would be listening to my students and they'd be like, oh no, that's not Indonesian, that's something else. So it made it tricky for me as a learner, but it was a very cool experience. These are just some more pictures from Indonesia. So this was on one of the last days. I think I'm here in the middle. My face is kind of red. I think I was crying, like saying goodbye to everybody after several months there. But these were the students that I had at the English school. And this is just like a cornfield there. It was like one of my first days. I was excited to be in this new village. So that's where I was. In the States, as I mentioned, I taught both Spanish and English. I taught English in a couple of different contexts there, but the most time that I spent was at a community college there. It was primarily group classes, or it was only group classes, but primarily adult students and a couple of teens. The levels were A1, B1, and B2. And this was a very difficult teaching context, because it was the first time that I was teaching English to a mixed classroom with students from various different native languages. So we had students with native languages as Spanish, Mandarin, Ukrainian, Arabic. We had a whole mix of different native languages, which I think was so fun. It's such a multicultural, multilingual environment. I loved that. But as a teacher, I think I just had to really work at how can I bring material that is relevant to all of these students, and when it's not relevant to one or the other, how can I adapt, the classroom environment. So I think it was a great learning experience for me as a teacher. We had things like some students, like a native Spanish speaker, they're already pretty familiar with the English alphabet. They already know about writing from left to right. They're not working on, the writing out the letters and things, whereas we had native Arabic or Mandarin speakers that were trying to learn how to write the English letters and the basic writing aspects. So that was some of the challenges that we faced. Really different pronunciation difficulties, really different grammatical difficulties, and things like that. I think another thing that I really noticed in this context was being in the States, primarily my students, they were immigrants coming in, and a lot of them had negative experiences. A lot of them were coming in from environments, they were moving to the States out of necessity. Whereas when I was, in Indonesia with teens, they were like at summer camp and having fun. And so they were excited and really wanting to learn. In this context, I had a lot of students from all over the world, but they had a lot of, kind of negative emotional relationships with English. They had really negative experiences, not all of them, but several of them had really negative experiences with immigrating to the States. A lot of them didn't have a lot of a social life or weren't able to work yet. They were really dependent on their young children to translate for them and stuff day to day. So I think this was definitely a place where I had to learn, to really build the trust and like that relationship with the students before we could really get started on, more language related goals. So this was definitely a slower process, but such a great learning experience for me, and very rewarding, I think, to see these students' progress and how, from the beginning to the end, how they were able to, see them start getting, to a place where they were able to get jobs and where they're able to, really start their life. So that was a very unique experience as well. And now I'm here living in Brazil. So I'm teaching English now only online. When I first came here to Brazil, I was teaching some private lessons. I spent time working at a language school, did some in-person classes. But now over the last few years, I've kind of narrowed it down. So Hobson kind of mentioned this in the beginning, but now I work only online, teaching online group classes. I work only with adults, and my students range from B2 to C2 level. I would say probably around 90% of my students now are actually English teachers. And so I'm working with them as, working to develop English skills, and also kind of as a mentor, somebody for my students to come to when they have questions for their students as well, when they're teaching. 99% of my students are native Brazilian Portuguese speakers. I have a few students that are native Spanish speakers, but all of them also speak Brazilian Portuguese. So that has been, I think, really nice as a teacher. I think it's become easier, the more of a narrow focus I've had with students, instead of having all these different native languages, all different contexts, now I really have narrowed it down. They're all adults, they're almost all native Brazilian Portuguese speakers, and they're all advanced. So predicting what difficulties they're going to have and how I can best help my students, bringing relevant material has become a lot easier. So that's what I do now. I love it. As I said, I think we started this, my husband and I, maybe about a year after I had been living here is when we kind of really started get going. So we have a course now, it's called All-Star Squad, and it's a mix of recorded video lessons and live meetings. So this is just a screenshot from one of the live meetings with some of my students. Yeah, and that's what I have today. So thank you so much. Here's my email and Instagram, which Hobson mentioned in the beginning, if you'd like to contact me for some reason. And yeah, does anybody have, should I shut off or stop sharing the screen and see if anybody has questions?
Yeah, we already have one here in the chat, and the question comes from Klebe, and he wants to know about your teaching experience with like new immigrants. So he's asking, was your teaching experience only with new immigrants or also with foreign students, those staying there for a while? Was your focus in terms of methodology different from between these two groups?
Yeah, so I did teach students that were like university students doing an exchange, but that was actually in a different environment, so they were separate. So the photos I shared, this was at a community college. They were free classes for people that were really immigrating. So, thinking about focus and stuff there, I was really focusing a lot on getting jobs, on learning how to, really practical life skills of like, oh, you need to go to the post office. How can you send this? If you need to, work out things with, getting health insurance, these kind of things. So that was more the focus for this group. I also taught students at a different university, and they were like on an exchange. So that was definitely like an academic focus. I was preparing them. They were in a specific program at the university to be able to eventually take classes and get a degree at the university. So I think it was like the first year when they came on the exchange, they spent just studying English. They came in at like a low intermediate level. And my goal was to help them get to the place where they were able to study in English. So there we focused on a lot more academic English, a lot of writing skills, writing essays, how to take notes in English, different things that would help them in the university setting.
Okay, that's great. So has anybody here got questions? Okay, there's tons of people. Okay, maybe you. Yeah, I guess so, but I think you'll have to come a little closer so she can hear. We have no mics in this room. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is your perception on the English spoken by Brazilians? What are like the common difficulties we usually have when you're learning English?
So can I answer?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I would say my main focus in my master's program and stuff has been on phonetics and phonology. So I think what immediately comes to mind are some specific pronunciation difficulties. So things like determining or distinguishing between vowel sounds. So a common one that I actually worked on in my research in my master's program were the eh and a vowels in words like bed and bad. Or we have other minimal pairs like ship and sheep, those e vowels, or pool and pull. So I think these vowel pairs tend to be very tricky. That's one that I've noticed even up until the advanced level. I think oftentimes learners are able to even be able to reproduce these sounds correctly, but they sometimes have difficulty perceiving them when they're isolated. So a lot of times I'll say like, okay, here's bed and bad. Now tell me which one is which, and students will be able to do that. But if I just say one of the words isolated without another like sound to compare it to, a lot of times students have difficulty perceiving which sound that is. So I would say that that's one of the biggest things that stuck out to me. I'm biased, of course, because I have I have been studying specifically these vowel pairs for the last 3 years, I guess, doing research on that. But I would say that's one of the major things. I think looking more at like vocabulary or grammar, I think phrasal verbs tend to be difficult. You know, a difficult aspect as well. But yeah, I think, you know, I really enjoyed learning how to teach English, you know, here in Brazil in this specific context.
Okay, so does that answer your question, or yeah? Anybody else?
Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Okay, I started well.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
You sure did.
So first of all, congratulations. I know your work and I really like it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I have so many questions. Okay, let me think.
Okay.
That's probably going to be
I'm a little nervous now. Okay.
Okay, first of all, I think you mentioned before that in your house you speak English and Portuguese.
Yes.
So do you speak Portuguese? And if so, where does this interest for Portuguese come from for Brazil? And I think that's all for now.
So where does my interest, like where did it kind of come from to want to learn Portuguese? And
Yes.
I would say it started, you know, when I was traveling, I actually met Brazilians. People say Brazilians are all over the world. You know, you can find Brazilians anywhere. And it's true. I met Brazilians when I was living in Australia. I met them when I was traveling in Korea, you know, different places around the world. And I think I had a really good impression because all the Brazilians that I met, they were so friendly, so welcoming, and, you know, just really encouraging. And so I think that was probably the first taste of Brazil that I had, that really kind of made me interested in learning more about the country and, you know, wanting to to eventually learn the language and stuff. I think language-wise, I studied Spanish in school and eventually became a Spanish teacher. And then I kind of started going through the Romance languages. So then I mentioned before I spent time living in Italy, I was working on learning Italian. I studied French for some time, which was not as successful as Italian and Spanish, but I had some contact with it. And so I think I was kind of just working my way through the Romance languages, and I was like, oh, Portuguese, that's a nice one to throw in there as well. And so that, coupled with the good impression that I had of Brazilians before, I think made me interested in it. And eventually I had done a lot of traveling. I was back in the States and was thinking about, doing a year abroad before I came back. And my plan was originally to get my master's degree in the States. And then I started talking to some of my professors at the university in the States. And they actually recommended, they said, I was talking about wanting to learn other languages, etc. And they were like, oh, you should, why don't you get your master's degree in Brazil? That was one of the countries that came up. And I was kind of like, all right, I'm down for anything. And and so started looking into it more. Of course, when I met my husband, that was, at the time he wasn't my husband, but met him, fell in love. So that was another, motivation to want to come here. And then as soon as I came, I had traveled quite a bit before. I've been in contact with other languages and in countries, but when I was introduced to the culture here and started hearing the language, I was like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. I love this so much. So then I wanted to stay. I don't know if that answered your question. I kind of started going off on a tangent.
Okay, that's great. I have another one, the last one.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a meet and greet session, by the way. So.
Okay, so, in this adult life, we are so busy with work and so on. Do you have any tip to give to us? I mean, to learn, because Portuguese is such a difficult language. And what would you say to us?
Well, I think, a lot of times, as you mentioned, we don't have necessarily a lot of time to sit and really take a class all the time. Sometimes we do, and that's great. But I think, a great way is to really start living the language. Is you kind of create your own immersive experience, so you really start, putting English or Portuguese or whatever language you're learning into your daily life, whether that be, podcast while you're washing the dishes, or listening to music while you're going on a run at the gym or whatever, or watching TV shows in that language or different things. So inserting that language into your like already established routine, but now like switching that routine into your target language, I think is a great way to get started on that.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the questions.
Okay, more questions? Else?
We have time for one last one.
No, we do. No, we do have like plenty of time, so we can come to the front, have a seat for this meet and greet session with Elisabeth Bunch. Or teacher Beth. Yeah.
Hi there, my name is Ivan.
Hello.
I'm an English teacher myself. My question
Oh,
is,
awesome.
since you mentioned you have this whole experience, teaching English all around the world, which age group did you most feel like close to, and which group you think it's better for you? I mean, which group do you have as your favorite?
What I'm doing now. I think I really love working with adults. I had a lot of fun with teenagers as well. I think it requires a lot more energy. You have to be a lot more. I think I really enjoyed teens in person, but since I teach online now, I think I really prefer adults. Kids, I love working with kids and I love teaching languages. I think it's not my favorite combination of the two. I think I prefer to work with kids or, be with kids in another experience. My experience with teaching, English to children is often there's not as much motivation as there is with adult learners. A lot of times it's their parents that are putting them into classes. And so you might, have a good connection with the kids and they might like you and want to play and things. But I think that, I think I really appreciate adult learners because they often have a lot of motivation on their own.
Okay, just to know, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys. So I think Kleber has his hand. I think he has a second question, but
Okay,
let's see if somebody new has a question. No, Taya? No question? Nobody? Okay, so we can pass the floor to, what's his name? Kleber. Would you like to open your mic, Kleber, and ask your second question?
Sure. I actually put it in the chat, but
Yeah,
chat, but I can
if you could
simply
open
just
your,
read it out.
if you can open your camera as well.
It's not working today. I'm sorry. Well, it'll
It's
go
okay.
my voice, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah,
Right.
that's okay. You're sorry. Go ahead.
So yeah, it's all right. So my question is now to you that is now talking about your experience going out and all that. Now that you are in Brazil, and can you tell us a little bit more about your own personal challenges learning a foreign language?
Yeah, learning Portuguese specifically.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, I would say there's a couple of different things that have stuck out to me. Grammatically, I think one of the most difficult things for me to this day is working with gender. I think it's something that, it's just so much memorization. I think, there's words that you can predict, this noun is feminine or masculine because of the ending, but there's a lot of exceptions. And there's sometimes, I don't remember what the word is. I was talking with my husband the other day and he was telling me like, oh, it could be feminine or masculine, but then the meaning changes. And I was like, oh my gosh, what? So I think gender grammatically is one of the most difficult things for me. I think I've gotten to the point now where a lot of words, from being in contact with the language for about 4 years, I think I'm at the point now where I know the gender of a lot of words, but in, fast-paced conversation, when I'm talking with people, it's something that I tend to make a lot of kind of unconscious mistakes in. And then I'll hear like a recording of myself or something later and think, oh my gosh, I'm, messing this up so much. Thankfully, that's not something that causes a ton of communication errors though. And I think with pronunciation, it's kind of funny. I think there's these minimal pairs that are difficult typically for Brazilian learners of English with vowel sounds. And also there's those same or different minimal pairs that are difficult for a native English speaker learning English. So one that sticks out to me is, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to say it now, vo and vo, like grandma and grandpa.
Yeah.
That's very hard because specifically in the, we have some native speakers of English do have this vowel distinction depending on what region they're from. My region, we don't have any distinction. So that's very difficult for me to hear and to reproduce. And I've noticed that a lot with my nephews and niece here in Brazil. When we're in like family gatherings with my husband's family, a lot of times they will say like vo or va, and I don't know who they're calling to, if it's their grandma or grandpa. So that's been something kind of funny. Like sometimes they've like called, say their grandma, and I'm like, oh, sogra, why aren't you like answering that? Oh no, they're talking to grandpa. So, so I think that's something that's I've really noticed. I think sometimes, it's the same thing. Somebody can sit there and say the two words and I can tell you which is which, but when the kids are just saying one isolated, it's very difficult to understand. So I'd say that's one of the biggest pronunciation difficulties for me as well.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know you didn't have those two vowels.
Yeah, it depends on what part of the States you're from. My region, we don't have that.
Because I thought like Spanish speakers would have that difficulty, right? Because they're known for having that difficulty
as well.
All right. Any more questions here in the room? No? Nobody? Okay. I think we still have some time. Clever, do you have another question?
Yeah, I was about to ask if I can squeeze in another question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So exactly. So knowing that you've had this experience with French, that didn't quite well work out, as I said. Did you find a lot of differences between the structure of the French language and the one you find in Portuguese? Or you mentioned something about gender, right? It's difficult to memorize one gender or the other. But as you know, not all Latin languages have the same sort of gender, because there are words in French that are feminine and in Portuguese they're masculine. And this throws a lot of confusion when you're trying to learn Portuguese, I suppose. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, so among the Romance languages, the first Romance language I learned was Spanish. And so I think I worked so hard at learning the gender for those words that then when I started learning Italian, French, and Portuguese, I would kind of assume the gender of nouns based on their equivalent in Spanish. And sometimes that was helpful, sometimes that was a mess. When it came to French, I think, that wasn't a language that I ever became really fluent at. I could carry on a very basic conversation conversation, but I think my listening skills weren't very well. I think that I'm a very visual learner. So I'm somebody that really needs to know like how to spell the words and be able to picture it in my mind to be able to say it. And French spelling for me was so crazy that that really seemed to be very difficult for me, because I think that didn't seem helpful to know how to spell the word and be able to picture it in my mind. Was very difficult. Whereas I feel like Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, the orthography matches the spelling or matches the pronunciation much more. So I think that was a lot easier. And I think the difficulty that I had with French perhaps was because of that. I only studied French for about a year, and it was in a university class, and it was simultaneously, I was also studying Spanish and Italian at that time. So I think, I trust that, like, if I had put more work into it, spent more time, and maybe taken a break from the other languages for a bit, I would have been able to get to a place of more fluency. I didn't end up, sticking around for it that long. But did that answer your question? I think sometimes I start talking and okay.
That's all right. I find it very interesting that you pointed out that you find it hard to, in French, for example, to try and work out the pronunciation of words, but that's the same impression that the French have of English.
Yes,
they will look at words, it is all a memorization type of learning, because there's no rule, or at least there are so many exceptions. It's quite difficult for them to capture and understand why certain word is pronounced in one way or the other.
Yeah, I know. And I know English does not have, that English does not have this good orthography and pronunciation relationship like other languages do. So I'm thankful it's my native language, so I don't have to learn it because of that.
Okay, well, since we have time, I'd like to ask you a question if nobody else has questions. Sorry. You're working with advanced speakers, professionals, right? You're mentoring them. I would like you to tell us a little bit about the challenges when it comes to like the learning of English, right? About some of the structures that get, fossilized, even because of brain maturational constraints, or even like lack of exposure to a certain kind of stimulus, like maybe like native or, like more English stimulus, like in the environment. What are some of these structures that you notice, like in your mentees, that that get fossilized, like let's say either in syntax, grammar, or phonology, which is our favorite realm? So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what I would say is particularly unique to teachers. I think, I think teachers, myself included, I'm a teacher, language teacher as well. I think often, we, spend so long getting comfortable with and then confident with different grammatical structures and things, that I think sometimes we start to lose sight of these small details that can very subtly change language, and how sometimes in English, in Portuguese, in any language, we don't speak perfect grammar, right? We say things in a wrong way, and sometimes it's very intentional, sometimes it's unconscious, but it's to communicate specific meaning, And I think sometimes we miss those small details of language. And I think as teachers, that makes sense, because often we're working with our own students, and, an A1 student, you may not be able to bring in all of these small details and subtleties to a beginner student. You just kind of need to give that, the basic explanation. And when that's your main contact with the language, that's what's getting reinforced in your mind. But I noticed some things specifically with grammar. One of the things that I've been working with my students on recently is the use of already with the present perfect. A thing that I would hear all the time is students, they would say something like, eu já fiz intercâmbio, and they would say, I have already done an exchange, and they're putting in that word already to translate for the word já, right? As they're translating that, which sometimes is great. Like sometimes that's a really useful use of that word, but a lot of times that translation, it sounds a little funny, because if you say I have already done an exchange in English, that use of already there is bringing in some kind of sense of surprise, or it's communicating a little bit more. So for example, if you say I have already done an exchange, it sounds like you're responding to something. It sounds like somebody is offering you an opportunity, like, oh, do you want to do an exchange next year to Canada or whatever? And the person's like, oh no, I have already done an exchange. But what I would hear a lot with my students, advanced students, is a lot of times they would say something like, I'd tell them like, oh, tell me about your experience learning English. And they would say something like, oh, I have already studied at an English school. I have already done an exchange. I have already da, 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 da. And they're just kind of listing things about themselves. And this use of already, it's such a small detail, but it sounds strange there. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And so, of course, so in the context of a conversation, of course, everybody's going to understand you. There's not going to be some major communication issue there. But these small details, that you work on, I think that's something that I really try and work on with my students. These small differences that can, make communication flow a little bit smoother. That can, bring in those small subtleties. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Okay.
If nobody else has other questions, I'm just gonna ask a last one. It's a very controversial one because we were in a previous talk here with Eliane, who works. She's an Italian teacher from Florida as well, and she creates material. She loves doing that. She creates material, and she said something really interesting because she said, "Oh, I like to include controversial issues." In class, and because of what she said, I just thought of something a little bit controversial in our area in ELT. It's the, let's say, disadvantages and advantages of having lessons with native and non-native speakers. I would like to hear from you on that, right? Because it's one of the topics that we discussed in one of Rosani's courses, right? We had a course on pronunciation teaching, right? Back in graduate school, and it's a heavily debated issue, and I'd like to know your opinion about that.
Yeah. So, I think, unfortunately, the debate goes a lot between, is it better to have a native speaker teacher or a non-native speaker teacher? And I think people start losing focus on is this a good teacher? Because I think what happens, unfortunately, is we have a lot of native speakers that are, of course, fluent in English, but they don't know how to teach, and just like in Portuguese or whatever, language you're not necessarily a good teacher in that language just because you speak it. I think those are two separate skills. So being fluent in a language and teaching are two separate things. So I think, if I'm choosing myself as a learner or recommending someone as a teacher, if I have a native speaker that's not a teacher, or a teacher that's a non-native speaker, for sure, go with the teacher. I think that's 100% a better choice. Now, if you have two teachers that are, qualified, good teachers, and one's a native speaker and one's a non-native speaker, I think the best choice is you get a combination of both, because I think they both have unique experiences that you can combine and different things to bring to the table. I think something I learned a lot with my colleagues that are native Portuguese speakers or native speakers of other languages, they have this experience of learning English as a second language. And so they have experienced this and kind of been in the shoes of the learners. That's difficult for me. And so a lot of times I think as a teacher, I think my biggest struggle is often grammar to teach to my students, because I have never learned English grammar. And so a lot of times I'll get questions from my students and I have to go and do the research because I'm like, I have not learned this, it's something that's just kind of unconsciously done now, So I think that's hard for me as a teacher. It's maybe a disadvantage of a native speaker that I think a non-native speaker has that experience. Whereas I think a native speaker often has a lot more contact with, current vocabulary, those subtleties of, using one vocabulary word versus another. What are those small differences? And what are I think they're often, not always, but often the most updated in how this language is coming across. And pronunciation, I think, is great to have a mix of both. I've gotten from you, Hobson, you've helped me out quite a bit, with teaching pronunciation, a lot of your tips and things, because you really understand the language. I think with pronunciation, a great thing, and actually not just pronunciation, I think any aspect of the language, a great thing is to know the second language, So I think it's helpful, whether the speaker is a native speaker or not, I think it's helpful when you know both. I've taught English to native Portuguese speakers, and I speak Portuguese. I've also, as I mentioned, taught English in the States to speakers of Russian or speakers of Farsi. And that was very difficult because I couldn't predict what a lot of their difficulties would be. It was something, I think that was much more difficult. So I think it's a better experience if you're familiar with both languages, whether it's a native speaker or non-native. I think there's maybe advantages and disadvantages to both. So as a learner, I'd recommend you get contact with both, you know.
Great. Yeah, love that. I hope everybody appreciated Beth's presentation. There's something that I'd like to do here today that we haven't been doing because we're so pressed for time the whole time. But we could try to like a group photo. Like everybody should maybe come to the front here. We could try to like a group photo. Beth, this way, I don't know, you can post on your social network if you're free. So, yeah. So who's taking the photo? I like the American guy. There.
Am I in the photo? I can't really tell what's going on. I just see people walking this way.
No, I'm gonna send you a. So I'm gonna. Oh, you're gonna see what it would look like. I'm gonna send you
Okay.
what's.
Just tell me when to smile so I know, so I'm not like doing something funny.
Okay.
Oh, okay, I can see you.
Looks like it. I'm just sending you on your WhatsApp so that you know what's going on because you're being like projected on the screen here.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
Oh wow, my head is huge.
Well.
Okay.
Oh, you saw it now, right? So I had no idea what was going on. Just one moment.
One more. Right? 3, 2, 1. And then a selfie.
Yeah, selfie. Exactly. Definitely do that picture.
3, 2, 1. Oh, sorry.
There's a timer
One more.
there.
Just in
Yeah,
case
one more, just in case.
maybe someone blink. Yeah.
All right. Okay, that's good. Okay, so, yeah, we should be doing that like more often so that speakers have an idea of what's going on here. Okay, I'll send you the photos, Beth. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It was really great to see you. Okay.
Oh, it's so great
Talk
to see you
soon.
too.
Thank you for, this, the insights that you gave, especially through, the last questions, because I really wanted to hear from you, about this, like non-native native teachers debate, right? Because we
Oh,
saw
sure.
a lot of that. Yeah, I like your moderate approach. Let's put it this way. That's really cool. And yeah, if you want to know more about that, okay, everyone's still here. Don't forget to follow her but at Inglês Na Hora, right? That's your
Yeah,
handle
thank you.
on Instagram, right? So yeah, please follow her, like everybody online as well. Yeah. Okay, so Inglês Na Hora. All right, that's good. Okay, guys, so
All
we're
right.
go for a break now, and it's gonna be like a 30-minute break, and then we'll have like a last talk. There's gonna be an Italian one about Dante with Paola. Okay, she's here. Yes, she's right here. But we'll be like in the other room, and in this room we're gonna have something that I can't remember now, but it's gonna be cool whatsoever. All right. So yes, I'll see you. Bye, Beth. It was nice to see you.
All right. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Bye,
Thank you
guys.
so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.